Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet, Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kolonowski, Anshe Chesed, New York City, Rabbi Barry Chesler of the Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island. We are recording this. It's day 249 of the war and the hostages. And of course, we are praying for them, and we just are amazed by the operation to rescue the four hostages. This is something, a badly needed moment of uplift, not without its complications for sure. Given the death of the one of the commanders of the operation. Nevertheless, we're starting this off thinking about them and thinking about all the families affected and our communities all involved in this, as we've been doing since this began in October. And thinking also, of course, about the upcoming holiday of Shavuot. We're going to try and put this out before Shavuot, and maybe some people will get a chance to see it before Shavuot. And if they see it after Shavuot, that's okay too, because we'll have some discussion also about the Parsha Naso. In the meantime, for the Shavuot coming, Shavuot celebrates Matan Torah, but the contemporary observance of the holiday of Shavuot has, I think, taken on new meaning. And I think it has become, over the last several decades, a celebration of learning, a celebration of the place of learning, and the place of learning as community and learning for the sake of learning in Jewish community. And I just, as an opener, I just wanted to ask the two of you to reflect on the meaning of Shavuot in this light, in terms of the dominant experience, and then maybe we will talk about this whole idea of study of Torah as a way of coming close to God, or does it replace the experience of God in any way? So it's a big philosophical conversation, but let's start off with Shavuot. What Shavuot means to you? Do you get joy out of Shavuot? And how is it going to be experienced? And we'll have other things to talk about. So Jeremy Kalmanowski, Rabbi Kalmanowski, talk about Shavuot for a second.
Wow. Okay, those are big, huge, and important questions. Um, we in Judaism, in normative Judaism, I think we are broadly speaking kind of suspicious of God unmediated by Torah. Like Torah is an ongoing conversation that is both human and heavenly, and it's the conversation of rabbinic tradition about the meaning of Torah. And when somebody over the centuries in Jewish tradition or in those sister religions which abut Judaism, says, well, listen, let's dispense with the Torah and have God without the Torah. We have in general in Judaism thought that was out of bounds. We have tried to mediate and have a kind of balance between an experience of the divine presence in the world, which has a way of being, mekalkelet atashura, which has a way of breaking all the rules, because the rules are normal. They're normal. They're normative. There's human life as it usually is, but sometimes there are really electric things which seem to break through the normal rules. And those are powerful. But we in Judaism, in the religion Judaism, have tended to be suspicious of those things. So a thought that we can sort of get to God without the Torah, that doesn't really sound very effective as a Jewish religious mode. What we hope we have is that we meet God through the Torah, through the texts, through the behaviors, through the ideas. We discovered that there is something sacred in the practice of this religion. So I will be real hesitant to think, as sometimes, where there's any number of reasons why people are skeptical or non-believers or whatever, and people, we know them, they can love the Torah and they can love the tradition and sort of bracket the God question. I don't think that's very successful either. But I also don't think it's successful to say, let's dispense with these modes, let's dispense with these behaviors, and let's just feel the divine. That doesn't sound very Jewish. What I really want is to study the Torah and discover God in the Torah.
Right.
So my response might be a little weak, but I guess that would fit in with the theme of the holiday. What strikes me is something that Jeremy said about Judaism without Torah not being Jewish, but I think it is very much Israelite, very biblical. And what we have, I think, is a kind of transference in the understanding of our place in the world as Jews vis-a-vis God. And one of the things that I like to teach is the historical development of the holidays, because the three pilgrimage holidays originally start out as agricultural holidays, overladen with pagan mythology, because the people that observed the holidays originally were farmers of the pagan persuasion. And in the course of time, each of the Shalosh Regalim, the three festivals, is identified with a historical experience of the people outside the land. So Pesach, Matzot, is very early on linked to the Exodus from Egypt. In Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16, Shavuot is linked to the Egyptian experience. We're supposed to observe Shavuot and remember that we were slaves in Egypt. And then the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, Sukkot is linked to the wilderness tradition, with the booze being what God embraced us with while we were in the wilderness. And then finally, we come to the rabbinic idea of Shavuot, which doesn't quite work well with biblical chronology, is that this is the moment of revelation. That on Shavuot, we celebrate the revelation of God before the people, but it has become for us the giving of the Torah. Where we spend much less time focusing on God's presence on Mount Sinai, but rather we focus on the Torah that he gave us. And because of the wit and wisdom of the rabbis, we discover he actually gave us two Torahs at Mount Sinai, because one clearly was not enough. But what we have today with the increase of tikkunim and learning sessions is a kind of spiritualization of history. And that is that the study of Torah has become the key spiritual moment, as I think Jeremy correctly identified, as a vehicle or a means to have an encounter with God. And I would just add that study of the Torah itself tends to be safe, whereas looking for an encounter with God can be extraordinarily difficult and indeed dangerous.
So it's interesting. I react to this and think, in the process of study, we form our communities, and just I do this thing about explaining, what are the centers of, each holiday can be put on a grid with, what's the focus of the holiday and where is the holiday celebrated. So, for example, Pesach is celebrated at the home, in the home around the table. Sukkot is celebrated in the sukkah. It's open to the community. Shavuot is celebrated in the contemporary Jewish setting. It's in the Beit Midrash. It's in a place where we gather, and it celebrates learning. It celebrates the idea that as we learn, we are being attentive. And what I think what you're saying, Jeremy, first is there we learn not to satisfy just curiosities and not only to explore ideas, but honing in on a message that learning actually makes a certain demand on us. That learning, when you study the Torah, and we could talk about, God speaks to us through the study of Torah, but at a certain moment, you are to be transformed by that. And you are to be transformed by that with an idea, and you are to be transformed by that through a behavior that you do. And so, as you spoke, both of you spoke, I thought, okay, so, when you think about things that you learn in Torah, things, we study a lot of Breshit, and the three of us study together, and we learn from each other, and we go away from these conversations thinking about things differently, and perhaps incorporating ideas into our prayer, into our practice, into our own teaching, and into our own observance, into the way that we conduct ourselves in our life, in terms of, thinking through situations and trying to, not only, of course, in the ritual world, but in the daily life of a Jew, and all of that's happening when we study. And at the bottom of it is joy, and that the experience of studying together, and the experience of kind of, trying to be attentive to the divine word that comes through, however we interpret that. It's almost to say, something is trying to break through to us. I love that
Totally.
image, and perhaps we could talk about the imagery and
Yeah.
the metaphors that the three of us use. It's like God is breaking through to humanity, and this is what we have to understand that, and that's profoundly joyful, I think.
I love this, and I would refer to it in two ways. One of which is, and forgive me for, this is kind of like ambient 20th century philosophy, but I don't know like who's who and what whoever said these things, but there's a difference between knowledge and understanding. Like certain things is a really intellectual act. You understand certain things. That's a whole person kind of act. And hopefully Torah study leads us from a certain kind of knowledge to a certain kind of understanding, and experience brings us to a certain kind of whole life understanding. And hopefully Torah study is not the knowledge of facts and the knowledge of certain rules, but that it is life shaping. The Shavuot, to the extent that we're talking about right now, it is, especially for modern, Passover, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, even Sukkot. Lots of Jews have it. I think the Shavuot really is for, has been adopted by, has been loved by those Jews who really like the books. The second thing I was going to say about it is that in Judaism, it is a message from the divine to earth, but Torah learning in Judaism is a highly cooperative experience that involves both God and the human interpreter. Like God gives, this is a sort of just of a rhetorical figure that I use sometimes. Like there's two Torahs, one that God gave us and one we give God. Like the Torah Sheba'al Peh is, as it were, the human gift towards heaven, and it opens up the potentialities that are in the received Torah. Now, like I'm not really making a theological comment about who wrote the Torah, and God gave us a Torah and we give God a Torah. I'm saying that for every Jew, there is something received from tradition, received from Moses, received from your great, 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 great ancestors. And there is something you contribute that awakens a potentiality, and it makes, in effect, makes God speak. But two figures, one of which we've known personally and one of which died 200 years ago, but Professor David Weiss Halivni, and in a similar vein, Rav Chaim of Volozhin, and late 18th, I guess, early 19th century rabbi, both said in different ways, you know what Midrash does? Midrash forces God's mouth open and makes God speak. Midrash, that creativity of human contribution to what the Torah means, it does arrive at a divine voice, but it's a divine voice that has been pried open by human creativity. And I should be so lucky as to ever feel that much success. But when I study Torah, I do feel that dialectic of the human gift, the divine gift meeting, and really, synergizing in an amazing way.
I love what you said, that, because it does kind of alter the perception of what we mean by the dual Torah. This was Neusner's coinage, the dual Jacob Neusner, the late professor of Talmud, rabbinics, etc. The idea that not he coined the word dual Torah, but of course the oral and written Torah, that's already before rabbinic. But that what you're saying is that we give a Torah back. That's a lovely way to shape it, because what we're always giving back is always going to be new. It's never going to be the same as what we gave back yesterday or last year. It's in a way, study of Torah is always an improvisation. It's always jazz. It's always something new. There's always the electricity of that, and which I would say that so what happens in Torah, and I touched on this before. I'll just kind of try and emphasize it here and get your response, which is it's the formation of relationship and community through the shared text. You were sharing with us, the study with a member of your family, study with a member of our community, study with. I have a group that I study with. I'm so proud of them, and I'm so I truly love them in the sense that we meet every week. We meet on Zoom, and we learn a lot from each other. It's a lot of fun, and over the course of the years since the pandemic started, and as different individuals have come in and out of the class, we've come to appreciate each other in that medium, of course, and also we've enjoyed this. We learn things from each other, and it's in the learning from each other we experience something of the divine. I guess it's the eternal thou. We're always, and it doesn't matter what instrumentalities we use, whether we're using Rashi or we're using the Midrash, or I bring lots of biblical scholars and all that stuff, because I truly love that kind of learning as well. But it's exciting in the sense that there's something that we're all working towards, and we're coming together, and that experience of coming together is just a spark of something that's beyond us. And I think then that Shavuot is reframing the experience of revelation, because the revelation experience at Sinai was terrifying. It was, they didn't want to. They didn't want to. They said, Moses, you go up and talk to him. We can't handle it. And all of a sudden, here we are, seated in our libraries, in our Beit Midrash, and around in our homes, in our living rooms, or wherever we do the tikkun, and wherever we study, and we're all kind of learning with each other. We're singing. We're eating a little bit of dairy food or ice cream or whatever. We're doing it, part of the night, through the night.
Oatly, Oatly. Well, not ice cream, Oatly
Oatly, right? That's right. That's right.
for the
Vegan
vegans
ice
among
cream.
us.
Vegan ice cream, and you know, I wouldn't go so far as to say I have this kind of transcendent experience. Not at all. But it's joy. It's nice. It's good.
One of
It's
us,
yeah,
two of us are still rabbis. One of us is a teacher in a school. So I want to hear from Barry, like, we chose our life paths, the three of us, partly because we fell in love with study.
yeah.
And you do it, we do it as part of our jobs that are multifaceted, but that's really your job, is studying and teaching. So how does this conversation sound, given from the ears of somebody who's a high school teacher?
It's great. I mean, what I wanted to say, I was thinking about what the two of you were saying, and that two ideas came to mind. First of all, Shavuot is kind of like the Mincha service. It's kind of left out, right? We have the Shachri service, the morning service, and the Mariv service, which, because they both contain the Shema and Amidah, are the focal points for most people. And Mincha we sort of throw in with Mariv, just so we have time to get it done. And in a similar way, Shavuot also is kind of misplaced. So I like what you said, because what we do on Shavuot is we take the freedom from Pesach and combine it with the joy of Sukkot to create or recreate this holiday of Shavuot and make it much more than I think it was originally intended or imagined to be.
Right.
And the other thing I wanted to say had to do with the process of education itself. Because, thinking back about the rise of Hasidism, the rise of the Hasidic movement, one of the things that they reacted to was the sense that Torah education had become too elite, and it no longer spoke to the masses. And the Hasidic movement, emphasizing joy in mitzvah, joy in prayer, tried to bring a different focus to the community. What we have today, with the expansion of learning opportunities on Shavuot, is a complete democratization of Torah learning. It no longer belongs to the religious or only the religious. It belongs to anyone who is willing either to open a book by him or herself with a friend, or willing to step into a venue where other people are studying and to find some common language of discourse. And in that sense, it makes it, in my mind, much more powerful, because I think it speaks to the spirit of the day, which ultimately is the way that we wish to encounter God, I think.
All right. So having said that, I'm going to use the last verse of Parshat Naso as a jumping point. I'd love to talk about the gifts of the Nesiim, but we'd be here all day. It's
And we wouldn't say anything terribly new about each one.
And I'd love to talk about the priestly blessing, and I'd love to talk about the Nazir. But this last verse, and we've kind of, I think we've touched on it in the past. The last verse of Parshat Naso says as follows, and I'm going to read it in Hebrew. I'm going to get Jeremy to translate it. Ubevo Moshe, translate the hard parts.
Okay.
Ubevo Moshe el Omoed. When Moses came to the tent of meeting, the Daberito, to speak to him, to God, Vayishma et hakol. He heard the voice, and the word is midaber elav, midaber elav, and it's written in a very peculiar. It's not midaber speaking, but midaber. I'm going to turn it over to you, Jeremy. Now, midaber.
Okay. I'm just calling up my electronic version, so I have everything perfect. Chapter 7, verse 89, and I'm calling up my
So
Rashi.
Moses hears the voice. Midaber elav me'al hakapora.
Okay, so if anybody, yes, so if any of our throngs of listeners have the text in front of you or electronically, you will see that the word midaber in that chapter 7, verse 89 has a dot, a dagesh, both in the letter bet, which is to be expected. So the word midaber is a hard B, not midaver, and that's a standard verbal form. But there is an oddity in that there's also a dot, a dagesh, in the dalet, and that is not typical of the word midaber, that God is speaking. And so if the meaning were ubevo Moshe lo moed, and Moses came to the tent of meeting, ledaberito, you'll see that there's no dagesh in that daled, to speak to God. Vayishma et hakol midaber elav, and he heard the voice speaking to him. You can't have the dot, you can't have that dagesh in the daled. If God was just, quote, speaking to him in the normal way of communication, there would be no dot there. And God would be speaking to Moses, me'al kaporet, above the cover of the ark, which is on the ark of the covenant of the testimony, mibein shnei hakruvim, between the two cherubs, vayidaber elav, and speak, and then spoke to him. And you see that again, there's no daled there's no dagesh in that daled, but in the one that we're talking about now, that Moses heard the voice midaber, it would appear, as Rashi tells us, that scrolling down to this, it would appear that this is a kind of there's another letter that has been assimilated into that dalet, which explains the dagesh, and it would probably mean, as Rashi says, mit daber elav, that the voice of God was speaking to itself.
Yeah.
Speaking to itself. Now, revelation, we have a way of talking about the divine revelation to Israel, to humanity, as God writes you a book. God gives you instruction. God tells you what to do. Don't eat cheeseburgers and put on your tefillin and don't light fire on Shabbos. And all those things are core Jewish behaviors. But in this teeny little piece of grammatical oddity, we'll read the verse like precisely with this insight of this grammatical deviance. When Moses came to the tent of meeting to speak to God, he heard the voice of the divine speaking to itself from above the ark cover, above the cover of the ark of the testimony, between the Kruvim, and then God spoke to him. So the revelation, the description of revelation, or the implicit description of revelation, is not God says to Moses, don't eat cheeseburgers. It's that Moses is able to access the inner life, the inner conversation of the divine to itself. And then, as it were, God turns from heaven enclosed in heaven and speaks to the human.
Yeah.
Now, Maimonides, Maimonides, very profound medieval Aristotelian philosopher, Aristotle described the divine as thought, thinking, thought. In Rambam's terms, or Rambam wrote it in Arabic, but it was translated in the Guide for the Perplexed as the unity of sechel, maskil, umuskal. It was the unity of intellect, the being with intellect, and the thing that is understood. God is just a thought engine. And so to read this passage in a little bit of a quasi Rambam vein, not too much, because Rambam is a little too abstract for myself. It's something like, it's not that Moses hears a normative instruction of how to keep Shabbos and what your business ethics should be. All those things are very important. But he accesses something, of God kind of meditating to God's self, God own reflecting to God's self. But then the last two words are key, because then it's Vayidaber Elav. Then God speaks to Moses. So I feel like at some level, religion is encapsulated in this, that a human being, the revelation, that a revealed religion is encapsulated in this, that a human being can have an experience of the divine that is cosmic, and it always turns into Torah for the earth. It always turns into a human scale Torah in which God speaks to the human being. Moses doesn't just get, caught up in the divine meditation and leaves the planet and, goes off into the spheres. Moses hears this divine meditation, and it turns out that it's speaking to him. And then he is our teacher and translates that into our Torah.
So there's something so compelling about that, in terms of just in imagining and in the poetry of it, in the sense that we are attentive to echoes. We're attentive to the echoes of the divine self conversation, and on the one hand, as I say, that's a glass of wine and a meditation and thinking about that. On the other hand, I couldn't help but think, and you may experience this more than I do, living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. But there's a woman in my community who walks up and down the street and talks to herself. She's
Oh, I
talking.
experience a lot of that. Yeah.
So this, and I don't want to be near her when she's talking to herself, because she says a lot of things that are just non
Right.
sequiturs.
Elliot, I have to interject here.
Go
If
ahead.
you would respond to her, she would no longer be talking to herself.
Okay. But
And I mean that very
and you're
sincerely,
making
because
a
I
very
have a
deep
comment
point there.
about the verse.
Okay, so you're making a deep point there, which is that on some level, it's God is looking for the partner in the conversation. Okay, and that's it's a constant swirl of words and conversation, and we're connecting to just one minuscule fraction of the effulgence, what's pouring out of God's conversation, and trying to grab it and to attend to it and to interpret it. And
So
that's
I want to offer a
go
slightly
ahead.
different reading of the verse.
Right.
And first of all, I think we have to recognize that it's practically impossible to untangle all the pronominal references. The translation that I'm looking at also on Sefaria identifies the he often as God, but it could also be Moshe. There's nothing in the verse to say otherwise. And what I would suggest is that when Moses comes in to speak to God, he understands the voice. And his understanding of the voice of God is what allows him to talk back, to respond. And so that, properly speaking, this kind of revelation is not the revealing of God, but the response of an understanding human being.
So
And
the
that's
last
where the
Vaydaber Elav, the final two words of the sentence Vaydaber Elav, for you,
I want to read it as Moses is
yeah,
speaking to God.
that's lovely. God, he hears
And
God speaking to himself and then enters the conversation.
yes, and that's, I think, what makes Revelation so powerful, because it's not this ineffable experience of God, which is beyond our comprehension. It's precisely our comprehension of God, however limited it might be. And that's what will allow our religious experience to develop.
I think we all need a certain set of metaphors for this, and perhaps with this we'll conclude. We're just almost at the end here, which is, when you explain this, when you try to teach this, what are the metaphors that you're using? And here, you could interpret the end of Naso almost metaphorically, which is that, here's God having this intense conversation, and Moses is outside but hearing it, and from that he's hearing it. So we make the conversation the metaphor for revelation, or would you have something else to?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
for
Right.
many years, the principal metaphor for me is a prism. How does a prism work? It takes white light and diffuses it into a rainbow. If you don't have the prism, all you see is the white light. But with the prism, you're able to see colors that you could not have imagined before. And that's what Torah study is. Torah is the prism that colors our life.
Okay.
That's just gorgeous.
Go ahead.
That's totally gorgeous. By the way, it's a kind of a native metaphor to Kabbalah that the divine, the Spirot are a unity, but at a certain angle, you can see them benifrad, you can see each of them break out. This is not an explanation of the verse, but it is another rabbinic teaching that I find just so deep. There's a midrash in Shemot Rabbah that says that God and Moses are the ocean and a cave at the seashore. The water surges into the cave, and then the cave water surges back into the ocean, and at a certain point, it's no longer extricable, and you can't say which one was originally the cave water and which one was originally the ocean water. And the human intellect, this is what I was saying before about the contribution of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah to the written Torah. I actually said this to a conversion candidate today who grew up in a Jehovah's Witness, and she said, grew up in a Jehovah's Witness community, and she said, one thing that I have as I'm beginning this process is that I have a pretty good knowledge of she said, the quote unquote Old Testament, which is a phrase I don't use, actually the Hebrew Bible. But I said, that's amazing, and that will serve you very, very well. And you'll also come to understand that the way you may have read the Old Testament, we may read it differently because of our contributions, the human contribution of interpretation. You can't really say what's the text, what's the interpretation, what's the ocean water, what's the cave water. They all flow together inextricably.
Very
Nice.
nice.
I think it's Eddie Greenstein. I like his metaphor, which is the transmitter, that there's a transmitter transmitting all the time on different wavelengths, and we are the receivers, and depending on how attuned we are to the divine transmission, we are able to receive things. I think it's always been a kind of useful metaphor, but I'm going to kind of meditate on the other two metaphors here, in addition to, this is from Kenneth Seeskin, the whole idea that God really is trying to break through, whatever that means. And I think it would be a great exercise for our listeners and viewers to think about these metaphors and to conjure up their own metaphors for what their own experience is of revelation, or when they think about it, how do they perceive it? What are the metaphors that they use to shape that experience? And if you want to share that with us, we'd be happy to you can write to Barry's Facebook page.
Absolutely.
In the meantime, we want to thank you for sharing this time with us, and wishing Rabbi Kalmanovsky a nice trip. He's going to Israel next week to be in Israel for a week of solidarity and very intense week. So we
26 members of my shul.
nice Nisiya Tova, and share be our ambassador too. We want to share that experience with you, and perhaps you'll tell us about it when you return. We'll be back probably together as the three of us in 2 weeks, because of the way that Shavuot and the trip works out. In the meantime, thank you all for joining us, and on behalf of everyone, just want to say Chag Sameach, Happy Shavuot, and Shabbat Shalom.
Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye bye.